So I've always found HPD it was my experience, and many of the people that I've represented over the years describe it as a soul-sucking experience at HPD, where you start out with these great, motivations to be a police officer, and HPD literally and metaphorically beats it out of you. They beat the shit out of you every year of your life you're there, because they act like at any moment you're going to cause them to get sued. So
accurate.
Is it?
Accurate. Now,
and I think it starts from the top down, but that's just...
No, it does. It definitely flows down from the top. I think soul sucking is an excellent expression, a good description. But I have to be honest and say that in my 30-year career, there were moments of soul sucking, despair. Absolutely.
Did you have any with Troy Finner?
Oh, I had a few surreal experiences, Troy. But my point is, I'm very grateful to the department, not the specific people who I loathe, but the department in general. It gave me a great job. I spent a lot of time with my family, lots of time off, decent income. You're not going to get rich being a police officer. Hence my motivation to promote, I had no aspirations to be a leader. I liked it. I felt I was a decent leader, but it was basically to maximize my earning. I knew I would never be an assistant chief, so I had to promote as high as I could. Boom, boom, boom. Consecutive tests all the way up to captain. But there were moments and things, mostly not the job itself, but the internal dynamics of the department that become soul-sucking. The job itself, you literally just learn to deal with. And maybe a lot of it is compartmentalizing. A lot of it is just literally guys can just endure a lot of stuff and put it out of their minds.
Well, I think for most officers, it's in their 10th year that they realize that the department sees you as a liability, not an asset.
Yeah, that's accurate.
And it's about your 10th year where you realize that they would rather go to your funeral than answer a lawsuit with your name on it.
Yeah.
Because
hence the 10-year mark. It's funny you bring that up because, well, the 10-year mark is where I had finished law school and trying to determine if I wanted to continue. Do I want to stay a police officer or do I want to quit and be a full-time lawyer? My brother had a booming practice, was doing very well. You've since moved on and done very well for yourself.
Yes, but I graciously left the department.
Graciously.
At 11 years.
But they agreed. They both agreed, like Tucker Carlson and Fox agreed to separate.
I agree. I will leave. But at the 10-year mark, my dad had a philosophy that in the first 5 years, you're learning the job. If you're out there doing it, and there's lots of people who did a year or two in actual patrol and then went right to admin spots or whatever. But first 5 years, if you're in patrol, you're learning the job. And after 5 years, you're pretty comfortable. You know what you're doing. You still maybe have some things to learn, but you've pretty much, if you're out on the streets for 5 years, you see pretty much everything at that point. And, you may not be the best patrol officer, but you've now gained enough experience. He always said that then years 5 to 10, you're learning how to not work so hard. You're learning how to kind of milk calls, how to avoid calls, how to get out on stuff to avoid shit, and still doing the job, but you're not quite getting hammered with all the bullshit that's and my dad's philosophy was any patrolman who's still in patrol after 10 years, fire him. And I thought, holy crap, Dad, that is harsh. He says, well, if you have after 10 years, and I did 13 years in patrol, remember? So maybe he was advocating for me to be fired. But it was a very, general statement. He said, if after 10 years you haven't learned enough and experienced enough in the job as a patrolman to then want to use maybe your particular expertise in auto thefts, catching auto thieves or narcotics or promote, something. He thought you should definitely move on in your career after 10 years or so, because now he thought a patrol officer with 10, 15, 20, 30 years was worthless, tits on a boar or whatever the expression is. He says, you're not worth anything. Now that's a general statement. And I knew guys who did 25 years of patrol at Central who worked their asses off, but I understood his point. Now we've gotten off on track.
But no, that's a very jaded point of view. I mean,
I'm
sure you love your father, but no, I think that
he thought you ought to move on and either promote or do something more specific. But because it's a young man's game, that was his philosophy.
I understand that, but
keep bringing in the fresh troops to then learn and be the actual.
It's ignoring something very important. That
valuable experience.
Well, no, affirmative action. If you are not a particular category of box checking employee, your likelihood of being moved up or around the department is substantially less.
Oh yeah.
That is true. That's true.
And consequently, if you just happen to be a straight white male who, on occasion, expresses your opinion that something the department has done is not beneficial to the patrol officer, then you're marked as a troublemaker.
Could be.
For the rest of
Could
your
be.
life. And it's just like,
But I didn't even mean to get off on that tangent other than the experience factor and the 10-year mark. So at 10 years, I wanted to decide, am I going to be a lawyer? Am I going to do? I made the decision to promote, blah, blah, blah. And there were times of soul-sucking things, and in particular, dealing with Chief Finner towards the end of my career. And when I was over north, there was an occasion where he called me up on the phone. We had a discussion over a couple of officers that had been administratively relieved of duty. He was literally, I had him on speakerphone, which I didn't intend to do, and I left it on. All my staff could hear it. He's yelling at me over the speaker, telling me that I'm wrong, I'm wrong, I'm wrong. These people aren't administratively relieved. They were simply sent to North or removed from their positions at North while this complaint was being investigated. I said, Chief, you're wrong. And he just wouldn't listen to me. He just kept screaming at me that I was wrong. And I shouted him down. I've never shouted an assistant chief down in my life. I wouldn't even think of doing it, but I had to. And I said, Chief, stop. I said, you're wrong. And I finally convinced him. I said, I'm looking at their PPS profile right now. It says administratively relieved of duty. They can't understand why. They're upset, blah, blah, blah. Calls me back a couple minutes later, apologizing. You're right. The assistant chief who made the decision, supposedly, to relieve them of duty, didn't know they were relieved of duty.
so he didn't make the decision.
Obviously not.
It was a lie.
Obviously not.
Yeah.
So he apologized. You're right, Jerome. They were relieved of duty administratively, blah, blah, blah. And the whole case was bullshit. And they did end up getting some relatively minor discipline. But initially they
Which case was it?
It was an excessive force complaint out of North. And these guys were just being completely railroaded. And it worked out in their favor because I kicked
Patrol
the case
officers
out.
or TAC officers?
They weren't TAC. They weren't patrol. They may have just been patrol officers. I don't remember. I could probably tell you their names, but I don't want to. But I put them temporarily with my crime suppression unit while they were administratively relieved. They wanted them sitting on the desk, but these were hardworking guys. So I put them with the crime suppression people so they could just kind of assist them doing whatever. They weren't supposed to be out in the field because this TikTok video, or at the time, I think it was Instagram video, had made the rounds, and we don't want the community to get inflamed, God forbid. And the video did look kind of bad. You know, he was a handcuffed prisoner that had gotten away. The officer grabbed him, ended up spinning him around. He went flying down onto the ground. But he had to do that. The guy, number one, he was fleeing while handcuffed. He was about to run out into traffic, and the officer grabbed him from behind, and they both sort of lost their balance. And the guy did go down hard. It looked ugly. But that's police work sometimes. Anyway, they were trying to railroad him. It ultimately ended up working out. They cited him with some minor stuff, but they wanted to hit him with the excessive force. They wanted to hit him with truthfulness. They wanted to hit him with a lot of stuff. And so shouting him down gave me no pleasure, but I was kind of like stunned that he was just so clueless. I mean, his office made the decision apparently to relieve them of duty, and he's screaming at me, telling me they're not.
They're not clueless. They have an agenda.
True. Okay.
That's what I'm thinking.
So that was very frustrating, and it was very, very surreal to me that I had to shout down, and I think at the time he was executive assistant chief to Acevedo. And my whole staff heard it, and they heard me yelling back at him, and I thought, holy crap, I didn't intend for that to happen, but he calls me back, he apologizes, says, his mistake, blah, 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 and I'm thinking, okay, he owned up to it, but still, what an idiot. So fast forward to my new assignment in traffic enforcement, I get called down to his office with my assistant chief, Skillern, and it was to talk about the intersection takeover issue that had been going on, where these people in cars would block off intersections.
Well, no, they had four-wheelers, they had motorcycles, they had those
cars
cam
doing
spiders.
donuts.
Yeah.
But a shooting had occurred somewhere out in deep West Side's territory.
Yeah.
And I can't remember exactly where, but a shooting had
Like
occurred.
towards Highway 6, I think.
Yeah. And a shooting, Eldridge Parkway, something. Anyway, so a shooting had occurred at one of these events. And so he called this meeting because I'm over this intersection takeover squad. It was like a brand new 6 to 10 member squad that was supposed to go out and police these events or respond to them. And the meeting was supposedly to come up with a plan of action to deal with, these specific events. That case was already being investigated by my people along with one of the investigation commands. And so I get to this meeting, and we never, in this like 35-minute meeting, we never even bring it up. Nothing ever comes up about intersection takeovers, nothing. As soon as I sat down, he launches into me telling me I'm not engaged as a commander. He doesn't know what happened to me, how I've changed. At that point, I literally wanted to look at him and go, look in a freaking mirror, dude. You're the one that's changed. You become this complete asshole. So he's screaming at me in this meeting. He asks me, so how many of these after-hour events and weekend intersection takeover events have you gone out to? How many of you actually made the scene? Because that was very important. I said 0. And he just gets this look on his face like, oh my God, you're just failing as a commander. And I go, there haven't been any. I've not received one single phone call saying that there's been any kind of after hours or anything on weekends where I've been required to go out. There were a couple of little minor ones where one of my lieutenants went out and he called me immediately and I paid attention and I waited for the phone call, called me back, said it's under control. You don't have to make the scene. That happened twice in the 2 months I was in traffic enforcement. So we're sitting there. He's screaming at me, telling me I'm not engaged, I'm not doing my job, and I'm telling him I am engaged. And the honest truth is I was super engaged. I was almost relieved to be out of North because it was very busy and I wasn't getting burned out, but traffic enforcement was a good fit for me, I thought, because it's not in the patrol, calls for service loop, anything. It was very specific division where these guys come in, the method B, they do their job, and I was looking forward to it. So I was very engaged. And he's sitting there telling me I'm not engaged, I need to do my job, and I'm like, just bewildered. I'm like, what are you talking about? Meanwhile, my assistant chief, Skillern, is sitting there like a little kid, who's afraid of the teacher, and he won't even make eye contact with anybody. He's just sitting there the whole time. I'm looking at him like, hey, back me up here, motherfucker. Like every time you've called, have I not answered the phone immediately? Because he had made a point of saying that. He's been very responsive every time. In another context, he had said that, I was very responsive every time he called, every time he emailed, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, thanks for the defense, shithead. And of course, 9 months later, he's run off. Well, a lot of,
It was his turn.
Yeah, it was his turn. So I'm sitting in there's this bizarre meeting, and Chief Finner brings up, we need to get confidential informants inside those intersection takeover groups, those, whatever you want to call them, gangs. And so he turns to Skiller and he says, let's get with Chief Jones and get his folks to do this with confidential informants and this and that. And I said, Chief, my people are already a week and a half ahead of you. They've already contacted either narcotics or auto theft or somebody, scheduled a class, a 40-hour class, to have somebody come in and teach them all about the CI process, everything. We simply needed the money. We needed like $7,000 to pay for the 40-hour class. I talked to you on the phone like 2 days ago and told you that and said we need to pull some of the violent crime money, which we had more than,
More than 7,000.
Yeah, I said this is a tiny drop in the bucket. I think we had something like 20 or 40,000 left over. They were going to use a tiny portion. I said, I just told you about that. We needed the money for that, and you shot it down. You shot it down. Now, I think when I said that and used that terminology, he got pissed. And he just immediately started screaming in my face. I'm not making this up. You're being disrespectful. He said it like 5 times right in my face. And I'm like, still remember it because we were wearing the stupid masks, those masks that don't, literally cloth that does nothing. And he's screaming at me across the table. I'm this close, and he's going, you're being disrespectful. I'm like, by telling you what the conversation we just had the other day, I'm being disrespectful? And I had no answer. And then the meeting just wrapped up right at that point. We never talked about an intersection takeover plan. We never, how to address this big issue. He just basically said, I hope moving forward, we're all on the same page. I said, I thought we were all on the same page, Chief. Yeah. And he dismissed me. That was it. And I left. And I went back to the station. I sat there with my administrative lieutenant for a couple of minutes. And I said, I just had the most bizarre, surreal meeting with Chief Finner I've ever had. None of it made any sense. So I'm going to lunch with my wife. It was, noonish. Go to lunch with my wife. While I'm at lunch, get a phone call from Donna Crawford, who used to be the commander over traffic enforcement. So stupid me, I thought she was calling something traffic enforcement related. I go, hey, what's up, Donna? She goes, well, I got to tell you, I have to notify that you're being relieved of duty. And I'm like, what? Why? Well, I can't tell you that right now because they haven't really put the complaint to paper yet. And we don't know what the sites are and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, You've got to be kidding me. And I was relieved of duty. And now nothing ever came of the complaint. I think it was all cleared information. No, the complaint was complete hogwash. But that, pretty much just, at that point I was like, my God, 30 years, I can't put up with this crap. I'm done. I'm ready to move on. And I moved on. I retired. So anyway.
Well, what I want the audience to understand, whoever they may be, officers, civilians, just how absolutely spineless people are in the command staff. And there's this false notion that assistant chiefs, executive assistant, the chief of police himself are these omniscient people.
Oh, God.
And omnipotent people who are on top of everything and can solve a problem. They have no fucking idea.
No. And there are people in positions of power within the department. And I learned this when I went up to legal. There are many who are in these positions of power, and you just sort of assume that they're there because they're competent and they earned it and they're there for a reason and they're doing a good job. And then you find out, oh my God, these people are idiots. Total idiots. Not all of them, but you run into them. And like I would say Skillern is not an unintelligent man at all. And from what I heard, he was a kind of a bang up kind of patrol guy, back in the day. But when he was my command, I was a lieutenant at Westside. He was my commander at the time. Ballless, completely ballless, did a bunch of stupid shit that just to appease whoever his assistant chief was at the time. And I thought, why are you doing this? Well, I might have to work for that guy someday. He's not, and I even said, that's not even our assistant chief. And he's bringing this thing up to you. The specifics are unnecessary, but I thought he handled it about as badly as you can handle it. And I said, why are you doing this? I might have to work for that guy someday. And? This is stupid, but he did it. He did it anyway.
Is he the one who would quote scripture whenever he was?
No, that's Slinkard.
Oh, Slinkard.
There's Skillern and there's Slinkard. Slinkard is now the power, I guess, behind the throne. He's, what did I say his title was?
I forgot.
Chief Executive Police Chief. So you've got Finner is the chief of police. Slinkard is the chief executive of police.
Of police.
Or something like that. So you got Finner, I guess, is the figurehead to appease the community, to relate with the community. I don't know. But Slinkard's now what? The brains behind the operation? Smart guy, but that's baffling. And Skillern, not to harp on him too much, because he might even watch this. I don't care. I don't hold any ill will towards him. But, he sat there, basically assisted in, railroading me on a bogus complaint. And what did he get for it? What was it, 8 months later? He's run off. Dude, take a demotion or be fired. Well, he left and he landed on his feet, some dieball police chief, position.
So if you're a patrol officer at HPD and you want to know what's going on at that level, the only question that needs to be answered is, what would a sycophant do?
It's all about perceptions.
Exactly.
The perception
is reality.
That's right.
Yeah.
Perception is reality.
And just saying something like that, it's almost like the civilians who say, why didn't you shoot the gun out of his hand?
Yeah.
That's exactly what the perception is reality.
Yeah, but when your upper command is basically almost saying the exact same thing, but in a different way.
That's what I mean. They don't know what they're doing.
It's baffling.
It's like the Jack in the Box shooting, right? Where you had this gang of people who were serial aggravated robbery suspects, and they finally get into a shootout with the police, and there's this exchange of gunfire. And this was at North Shepherd,
right before I got there.
And Troy Finner shows up, and he's counting casings on the ground.
It's very important.
And he's like, all these bullets. How did they fire all these bullets? I don't know, man. Maybe they were doing some police work.
Have you ever fired a gun before? Of course he has. He knows. These questions are known.
How long is he on?
He's got over 30 years.
Oh, so he's fired his gun at least 30 times.
Yeah, he qualifies.
And so
once a year.
Maybe he's got some.
And the rumor was he was on the phone with Quanell X at the scene, counting the bullets or counting the casings.
Yeah, recounting the scene to Quanell, because that's where his priorities lie, apparently.
Yeah.
Not
talking to
Quanell.
the officers at the scene,
Yeah.
or the supervisors who made the scene. No, talking to Quanell X from the scene.
I'll give you another example that I wanted to bring up. Officer gets shot in the hand. Now, unfortunately, he was shot in the hand by his partner, but he was still shot in the hand in the line of duty, and he's recovering. An assistant chief comes to visit him. First question out of his mouth isn't, "Hey, how you doing?" It's, "Were you wearing your vest at the time of that shooting?" Okay, yeah. Eventually, I guess they get around to asking him, "How you doing? You recovering okay? Anything we can do for you?" Second assistant chief comes to visit him. First question out of his mouth, Were you wearing your vest during that shooting when that occurred? Third assistant chief visits him. First question was, how you doing? Is your hand okay? Blah, blah, blah. Then he asked him, were you wearing your vest? Now, I understand the importance of wearing a vest. I got into a very lazy habit when I was in patrol at Central on day shift. I stopped wearing my vest for a long time. It's a decision I made. I was willing to, suffer the consequences if something happened. Well, you make it policy, you discipline people. I get it. But the first question out of your mouth when you're visiting an injured officer is, were you wearing your vest?
And he wasn't even hit in the vest.
No, he was hitting the hand.
That's what I mean. So what does it matter?
Because that's all they care about. Were you following all departmental policies?
And you know why that is? But do you know why that is?
The liability issue? I don't know.
Because some fucking lawyer, some goddamn fucking lawyers vomited out some idea in someone's head that if officers aren't wearing their vest, we could be sued.
Ugh.
It's a safety regulation. No.
But that's
who you
does
work for
that?
the government. That law does not apply to a governmental subdivision or political subdivision in the state of Texas. That cause of action doesn't exist.
But the bigger point is, why would that come up? What would be the first thing you say to an injured officer? That's just stupid. It's failure.
I hate lawyers.
Complete failure.
I hate lawyers.
Yeah.
I hate them. Anyway,
Self-loathing.
so
Self-hating lawyer.
It's all self-loathing. But anyway, let's circle back around to Chief Fenner, because he was the executive assistant chief at this point. We're running long, I know.
let's go ahead.
But we can edit.
We will be.
My first I think I might have met Chief Fenner way back in the day. He was just maybe a few classes ahead of me. There was a connection with Beechnut, I think, because he worked Beechnut for a few years. So maybe it came up in conversation about my older brother. He knew him at Beechnut, whatever. And Troy was always very personable, very nice guy. But my first real extended interactions with him were when he was a sergeant in Durden's office in IED when I was in legal. So we didn't have a lot of contact with him, but a fair amount. And we'd see him, this and that. So he's being obviously brought up and mentored by Chief Durden. So he's a sergeant. Takes the lieutenant's test somewhere in the mid-2000s, either right before or right after I took my sergeant's test in 06. I promoted in 06. So he promotes to lieutenant. Very important to get into that top 50 to make the assessment, And I do remember, and anybody feel free to go back and check, a couple of questions were tossed from that lieutenant's test. And I remember it because a lieutenant that I knew vaulted into the top 50 as a result of those two questions. Well, I'm almost positive Troy Fenner also vaulted into the top 50 as a result of those two questions. Coincidence? Who knows? So, and back then, the promotional process, usually 35 to 45 lieutenants would get promoted on a list. Hardly ever exceeded 50. In fact, I can't even remember the last time it went over. Well, that list happened to go to like 70 or 73. But it was very important to get into that top 50 because the common knowledge was if you're not in that top 50, you have no shot of promoting a lieutenant. Well, he vaults into the top 50. He promotes to lieutenant. Goes to public affairs? I don't know. What does he do there that just lit the world on fire, made people think this is chief material? I don't know. I have no idea, but he's in public affairs, probably to get his face out there, get his name out there, maybe give him a little more practice at public speaking, which seems to not have done a whole lot of good.
Dale Carnegie course
but
is a failure.
He's a lieutenant. So then I take the next lieutenant's test, 09, I guess, roughly. I promoted. I was in the top 20. I promoted not fairly quickly because remember I was bypassed, but I did ultimately promote. He's still a lieutenant, never even taken a captain's test. I then take the next captain's test. I promote to captain in 14. He's still a lieutenant. I don't even remember where he worked, but let's assume he stayed in public affairs. I have no idea. I've never heard any stories about him going and distinguishing himself as a homicide lieutenant or ID or anything, or even as a patrol. Oh, he was a bang-up, awesome patrol lieutenant. Nothing. He's just a lieutenant. I'm now outranking him because I've made the decision to just promote on several tests. Next thing you know, he's an assistant chief. Well, a lot of people saw that coming. We all did. I wasn't shocked when it happened, but I was shocked when it happened. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I thought it was sooner than I thought it would have happened. But everybody knew he had been groomed, and they had always had in the back of their mind when he was working for Durden and he was tight with McClellan and everybody else, and probably Bradford too, that he was going to be a chief someday. We all knew it. So he gets promoted to assistant chief. He's gone from lieutenant, having done nothing notable that I'd ever heard. Maybe he was a fine lieutenant. I have no idea. But I'd heard stories about lieutenants who went out and kicked ass and took names. Kai Nikeen is one. I didn't even know Kai, but I'd heard his name thrown around. Oh, that's a bad motherfucker.
Kai Nikeen.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a good guy. And there were many other very competent lieutenants that you hear things about.
Bellamy.
I never heard anything like, man, that Troy Finner's burning it up over here as a lieutenant. He's, nice guy. I always heard he was a nice guy. Next thing you know, he's a chief. Well, I'm not surprised. It's all political anyway, Next thing you know, the mass exodus, he's executive assistant chief. Oh my God, I'm thinking, well, he was in over his head mentally, intellectually, honestly, as an assistant chief. Now he's the executive assistant chief. And I thought for him to have even just been a lieutenant was, man, he's Peter Principle. He's topped out, basically. And there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody has their own abilities and everybody has their own intellectual levels of, competence, whatever. But he never took a captain's test all those years. Why? If he had such grand ambitions of leadership, which he did, you knew he wanted to be a chief. He was being political and he was saying all the right things and doing all the right things and all that stuff. Why did he never take a captain's test?
Was he advised not to?
I guarantee you he was.
It might look bad.
Well, he comes in 28th out of 28 on, a captain's test. That doesn't look too good. And I'm not saying he would, but who knows? But I guarantee you he was told to sit tight. It's not unusual, is it, to promote people from lieutenant to assistant chief? Henry Gall, Charles McClellan.
What about Bradford? Did he go from
Bradford?
He went from sergeant
to chief. Did he not?
Yeah. So sergeant to assistant chief to chief.
I can name half a dozen. Durden was never a captain. Finner was never a captain. McClellan was never a captain. Ottmeyer was never a captain. There's a ton of them, more than you think.
Okay, I for one want you to stop lambasting Chief Finner, and I would like to just tell Chief Finner, go ahead and release the 911 tape from when your wife called, so we can.
Clear this up.
Yes. Because there's a lot of people who think that there was something else going on.
Clear your name
by releasing that 911 tape, and then we will find out it was all about you taking the COVID shot.
Yeah, all of it.
It
was about the COVID shot.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was all about the COVID shot.
Wow.
And that came out the next day.
Jesus.
What have you ever heard this department coming out with something the next day?
When it's that important.
Exactly.
It comes
that
out.
important.
It comes out quickly. Now, look, this isn't sour grapes. This isn't bitterness. This is nothing. This is simply stating, how do you end up chief? And now he's chief, but you've got this little co-chief. You've got Slinkard, who's, Mr. Genius, but again, how much actual policing did that guy do in his career? I have no idea. But he's a smarty pants and he's running the department. And
all right, as a former commander, there's a question I want to ask you. We're going to save it for the next video.
Okay.